Okay, I can.
Hello, everybody. We will try to start on time so that we will have more time for the panel as well as for your questions and answers. My name is Jasmina Vujic. I'm a faculty at Department of Nuclear Engineering and host for this event today. So I would like to welcome all of you. This will be a fantastic event. And we will have probably around almost 3 hours of discussion and learning about various issues that are related to our field. The atomic bomb, the specter of a global nuclear holocaust, and disasters like Fukushima have made nuclear energy synonymous with the darkest nightmares of the modern world. But what if everyone has nuclear power wrong? Pandora's Promise, which premiered at the Sundance Films Festival in January, is expected to open in theaters this summer, earned praise for taking its audience's nuclear fears heads-on. Whatever is your stance, Robert Stone's compelling film opens Pandora's box and promises to change the conversation for years to come. With the world's unquestionable thirst for energy and its resulting threat to our environment, the stakes may be nothing less than the survival of the planet. With that, I would like to thank Department of Nuclear Engineering, Berkeley Nuclear Research Center, and Nuclear Science and Security Consortium for co-sponsoring this event. I would also like to thank to all student volunteers to help out, as well as the volunteers from the Berkeley City College. Thank you very much, and now we will start with the film. I hope that all of you really enjoyed this excellent and informative documentary film. I enjoyed it very much, although this is not the first time I'm viewing this documentary. We will now go to the second part of this evening. We will have panel. But before that, I would like to mention that our Department of Nuclear Engineering participated very much in explaining to general public what happened during Fukushima accident and after the accident. We were basically interviewed every single day during those several weeks. We had crews from different channels and in the Bay Area calling upon us as well as nationally. And for that, we received American Nuclear Society Presidential Citation. But one person that I would like to introduce right now did even more than what we did. He was able to explain to general public what we were saying in scientific terms. This is John Fowler, who is health and science editor for KTVU Channel 2 in San Francisco Bay Area. He has covered nuclear power and nuclear engineering issues, including experimental nuclear science at national laboratories. He brings a University of California educational background in physics, which is actually very rare if you're talking about journalists. So it's why with this physics background, he was able to explain it to the general public. He also has a degree in experimental physiology to his broadcast journalism, and he has won numerous local, regional, and international awards for his reporting. John? So I would like to give you certificate of appreciation from our department. We wanted to do it last December, but you were not around. So thank you very much for all the public service and excellent journalism that you provided to us for all these years.
Lovely.
John is the moderator for our panel.
Thank you, Professor Voyage. I appreciate that. That was very generous of you. Thank you kindly. That's a surprise. I wasn't expecting this. I think all of us here felt this remarkable film to be compelling. Kudos. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed the way you put it together. And for me, it compelled me to think, to try to understand and reflect on the facts that face us. We are, what I like to say, in a disruptive time. We have technology, we have compelling resource and time issues, we have a time of disruptive use of technology from the cell phones and the power books and the electronics that we all use and depend upon. And I was speaking with Robert earlier, who said that some of the money for this film came from people who recognize the immense drain of new technology on electricity and our electrical power. So we should thank all the people who helped make this film possible. I'd like to start by introducing Robert Stone. He's a multi-award-winning, Oscar-nominated and Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. Did a wonderful bit of work today, as we can see here. Born in England, he grew up in both Europe and in America, graduated with a degree in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, moved to New York in 1983, determined to pursue a career in filmmaking, gained considerable recognition for his first film, Radio Bikini, which one I did not see, but premiered at Sundance, was nominated for Academy Award Best Feature Documentary, multitasking as producer, director, writer, editor, you name it. Has over 25 years of acclaimed feature documentaries about American history, pop culture. He did Gorilla, The Taking of Patty Hearst, which some of us might remember, Oswald's Ghost, Earth Days, Pandora's Promise, premiered at Sundance, as you know, this year, slated for theatrical release next summer. He continues to create personally crafted high-end documentary films from his home in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Robert Stone. Michael Schellenberger, you saw in the film, he was a compelling voice, I think, a very persuasive and powerful voice about the changes that happen to those of us who start to think about things. He's a co-founder with Ted Nordhaus of the Breakthrough Institute, leading public policy institute, working in the intersection of technology and the environment, things we all, I know, care about. Leading global thinkers on energy, climate, security, human development, politics. Their 2007 book, Breakthrough, was called Prescient by Time magazine, the best thing to happen in environmentalism since Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, by Wired. In 2002, co-founded the Apollo Alliance, now the Blue-Green Alliance, Blue-Green Coalition, forgive me, which advocated a $300 billion investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, a demand that was largely realized by President Barack Obama. In 2007, they received the Green Book Award and Time Magazine's 2008 Heroes of the Environment Award. Mr. Schellenberger and Nordhaus are leaders of a paradigm shift that we see now in climate and energy policy focused on moving away from making fossil fuels more expensive to making clean energy cheap. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Schellenberger. Our next panelist is Professor Per Peterson. He's at the Nuclear Engineering Department of the University of California. He performs research related to high temperature fission and fusion energy systems. as well as studying topics related to safety and security of nuclear materials and waste management, which we saw clearly identified here in the film. He was appointed in February 10 as a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future and co-chaired its Reactor and Fuel Cycle Technology Subcommittee. Probably no one better qualified to talk about what we can do and when than this gentleman, who has served as a member of numerous advisory committees to national laboratories, National Research Council, participated in the development of Generation 4 Roadmap 2002, of the Evaluation Methodology Group, co-chaired its Proliferation Resistance. We all want to keep nuclear weapons out of anybody who threatens us, at least. And the research he's done in the 1990s contributed to the development of a passive safety system that is now in use in the General Electric ESBWR boiling water reactor and Westinghouse AP1000 reactor designs, which are currently the standards of the world. He's, I could go on and on, but I will tell you, Professor Per Peterson is the expert we want to hear from. Professor, thank you very much. Next is another professor from the University of California, Professor Ju-Hong Ahn, received his doctoral degrees from UC Berkeley, University of Tokyo, and joined the faculty in UC Berkeley 1995. Her research focuses on performance assessments for advanced nuclear fuel cycles. He was a member of the IAEA research projects in Japan, South Korea, United States. He was a member of Nuclear Radiation Studies Board. Boy, long CV here too. He's also a fellow of the University of Tokyo, Minner Faculty Fellow of College of Engineering, UC Berkeley, for engineering ethics and social responsibility. Professor Ju-Hong Ahn. I'd first like to ask each of you if you would be kind enough to reflect a little bit about, first Professor Ahn, what you took from this film.
First of all, I'd like to appreciate this wonderful film to begin with. I kind of greatly admire the film by 2 points. One is that the film pointed out a very complicated and delicate issue of fairness and ethics aspects of the waste issue and the nuclear technology application issues. In the movie, the scenes of poor countries popped up many times. And that reminded me that this nuclear technology application is not just for us in these rich countries, but also for poor countries and also for the future people. And so, and I think this film expressed this important issue quite nicely and quite clearly. Another point was that the combined issues of radiological safety and proliferation risk of nuclear technology application has been quite accurately touched upon in this film. And we nuclear engineers try to convey this issue and the advantage of the nuclear technology to the publics. But I'm afraid our effort has not been so successful. And you today showed us how the professional in the creative world can do it, actually. And so I would like to start with my remark about to express my gratitude and appreciation for the film. Thank you.
Professor Peterson, could you help us a little bit with an understanding of perhaps the importance, the impact of this kind of outreach to the public?
Well, I would also like to express how impressed I am by this film, and in particular, Okay. Well, at any rate, not by our microphone technology here, of course. But so I think that when we look at these very difficult problems that the world faces, and in particular how intractable the issues are associated with controlling and reducing the use of fossil fuels and coal in particular, it's sobering and a little bit discouraging to see that no, we're not making progress, things are getting worse. And the question is, how do we address these problems in a practical way? The use of nuclear energy has been something that we've been able to scale to substantial scale. It is a complicated technology, and it is one that, if not used properly, can cause great harm, but otherwise has the potential to produce great benefit. The thing that I think is most impressive about the way this film presents these topics is its ability to place things into context and to give some idea of scale and magnitude of different problems, because it's only in assessing trade-offs that we can make good decisions. And very commonly when we look at issues that relate to nuclear technology, it's very difficult for us to place them into context and to give them scale and magnitude. And what this film has accomplished really is to, for each of the important problems, give you a point of reference so you can make the comparisons, and it makes it much easier to make decisions and to hold positions when you do that. And I've not seen that done before. So this is truly a unique and new contribution that this film makes, and it was really a pleasure to be able to watch it, and to meet the people who've helped to make it possible as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, you were in the film. We through you, had our own epiphanies and our own moments of change and point. Can you talk about how this crystallized in you, how this changed? You were a rabid, according to the film, you were a rabid environmentalist, and here you are now suggesting that we embrace nuclear power.
Well, I mean, I said a little bit in it, but you feel really a little scared. I mean, I think Mark Linus expressed that a little bit too. And you start saying things that sound crazy, like, I think nuclear power is actually pretty safe, and you say it to your friends and family, and they just kind of go, God, what happened to you, And then you kind of get a little more comfortable. You kind of tell your friends, and you kind of come out gradually to your friends. And it's still like, I just like every couple months, I just end up putting something up on my Facebook page, and everybody gets mad still. I mean, the most recent one, like I just put up, James Hansen had this paper that came out where he said that nuclear energy has saved 1.8 million lives, because if you hadn't built the nuclear, then you would have built fossil fuels, and it would have killed those people, would have killed more people. And he said if you do nuclear instead of more fossil fuels, you'll save 7 million lives. So I put that up, just one little sentence. James Hansen, nuclear saved 1.8 million lives, and it just resulted in a small riot on my Facebook page. And kind of throughout the comments, we're all kind of talking about how many people actually died in these different accidents. And at the end of it, a friend of mine who's actually pro-nuclear was like, I agree with you, but you have to recognize, how traumatic this is for people. And that's a tricky thing, because I think when you, just by saying, less than 100 people died at Chernobyl, people go, that's really insensitive, because, it sort of is in some ways, because there was this larger psychological trauma that people had, and I think it was very. And we all experience that, and I'm really glad to hear you say, because you go, look, this is a scary technology in a lot of ways. And I think that it's important. I think this movie has so much integrity in part because I think Robert just opens with Fukushima. He goes to Chernobyl, and he's not going to kind of pretend like it was all hunky-dory. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
Robert, I'm struck by a couple of things when I watched the film. As a journalist myself, I saw how powerfully you wove the narrative. I'm wondering how you want this trust in technology to be perceived?
How the trust in technology?
Through nuclear power, we're asking people to trust in technology, a technology they can't see, they can't touch, they don't understand.
Well, our entire society is technological, and I think we have to accept that. I think the younger people are much more accepting of technology because it's so much. It's been a part of our lives for a long time, but now with cell phones and computers, the internet, it's so deeply interwoven into our lives that I find young people are much more open to technological solutions to problems, whereas the generation that came of age in the 60s, it really forms the core of those who are anti-nuclear, and that's where the anti-nuclear movement started then, came out of a kind of rejection of technology, seeing that technology was actually doing harm to the environment, and this idea that maybe we could go back to nature and humanity could retreat from the natural world and this kind of sort of deification of nature. So man bad, nature good, was sort of a philosophical ethos of the time, and I think that's really changed in the face of climate change and the need to lift billions of people out of poverty in the third world, the developing world. All of these things have kind of changed the equation. So that philosophical underpinning of the environmental movement that came of age in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s before climate change was an issue, that philosophy doesn't really help you get out of this problem. And we have to embrace technology and make technology better, make technology our friend, improve it like these gentlemen here are doing, so that we can solve this most pressing problem.
It is a paradigm shift for so many people of my age who grew up. I'll tell you a little bit about me. My father worked in the nuclear weapons industry as he worked with the U.S. Army, and I only learned about that after he retired, and he was practically on his deathbed. He couldn't talk about it. And so during the intervening times, I was an activist against nuclear power. It was all wrong. I saw the hole in the head at Bodega Bay, for God's sakes. They were going to build a big nuclear power plant right on an earthquake fault. These people are stupid. And it's only dawned on me, maybe in the last 10 years, that I was really wrong. And I looked at the numbers, and I believed the scientists. Having a background in science myself, I looked at risk and benefit and saw very clearly that the risk and benefit analysis for nuclear power falls on the benefit rather than on the risk, and has shown so durably. I found it difficult for me to convince my journalistic colleagues to go along with me, and a lot of them are still pretty much in that ultra-liberal camp. But we're beginning to have these conversations now in science groups that I work with among science writers, as well as with regular run-of-the-mill general assignment reporters. They do seem to be getting it. So the message may change, partly due to what you're doing. Can you shine a light on your hope? What do you hope this film and others maybe that you may do?
First of all, just getting involved in this subject has made me more hopeful and excited about the future than I think I've ever been in my whole life. I mean, when I came of age, just being reflexively anti-nuclear like most people. My first film was an anti-nuclear documentary. I've made several films about the environmental movement. I was anti-nuclear, but I didn't think of it much more than that's what a liberal democratic environmentalist would think. That's just the way all my friends thought, and that was that. My sort of epiphany on this really came about from reading Stuart Brand's book, and it just opened up a whole new way of thinking. And this was coming right after I made this film Earth Days about the rise of the environmental movement that Stuart was in. And in making that film, I became really kind of painfully aware about how pessimistic a great many environmentalists actually are. And there's a lot of apocalyptic thinking that goes on infused with the whole climate change thing. And it's very easy to get kind of depressed and thinking, well, oh God, this, it's all kind of hopeless. Once you get your head around this issue, and once you really understand what's going on here, there's an incredible degree of hope. And we really can solve this problem. And that it's not a technological problem. We actually have the technological solutions to solve this problem. It's a political problem, a social problem, all tied up with the connection, I believe, at its root, that nuclear power came out of nuclear weapons. And so parsing that difference, separating those two things out, looking at this technology with fresh eyes. And I wanted this film to sort of press the reset button, if you will. And that's why, it tells the whole history of this technology anew with fresh eyes in the context of climate change and where we are today, that would impart a hopeful message. And I had, at Sundance, I had people coming up to me saying, before I saw your movie, I didn't even know if I wanted to have kids. They're so upset about the future and feeling like they had, that there is a hopeful future. And I think there really is. That's what's so exciting. And that's why I'm, for the next year of my life, I plan to go around and show this film all over the world and talk about it.
You've seen it here first, by the way. This is the world's premiere, I think, is it not? Outside of the film
I've made a few changes to the film after Sundance and it improved it a little bit. So this is probably the first time this version has been seen. So let's call it a world premiere.
There we go. We're passing out notes for questions, and it'd be great if you write down a quick question. I'll take a look at them, and I'll, eliminate duplicates, that sort of thing. But I know there must be a lot of questions about what we do next, where we go, and here we are. What do we do next? Where do we go? There it is. First question goes right back to you, Robert. Plans to distribute the film to a larger audience? I know you do. Can you talk about that?
The film is going to be released in movie theaters around the country beginning in mid-June. We're open in New York on June 12th and rolling out across the country. Then I'll play in the Shattuck here, and it's going to be broadcast on CNN in November. And then we're going to take it around the world. We're in negotiations right now with a distributor in Japan, which will be very exciting. But yeah, we want to take this film around the world and get it seen by as many people as possible. We're going to open, also in November, we're going to be on iTunes in 25 countries. So, look, the purpose of this is to change the conversation that we're having, because we're having this circular conversation that's gone on for way, way, way too long. And if we're going to fix this problem, we need to start thinking anew. And I made this film to try to get nuclear power on the table in any discussion about how we move forward with climate change. It's become and that was starting to happen before Fukushima, and it needs to start happening again. So that's why I made it. I'm going to, like I said, devote the next year of my life getting it seen by as many people as possible. I need your help to do that, to go on your Facebook and Twitter and tell people to come out and see this movie, because that's going to make a difference if people start talking about this and having this conversation.
Michael, there's a good question here. Near the end of this film, the line, "It's becoming a movement." The question here is it really? Who's going to lead this movement? Every young environmentalist known to this writer is anti-nuclear. Who's going to lead this movement?
Well, I think first of all movements, people think of movements and they go, well, I don't see 500,000 people in the streets, so how could this possibly be a movement? And of course, when you go understand the history of the environmental movement, there's environment writing going on for 10 years before Earth Day. So you have, Rachel Carson's book comes out in 1962. You have environmental consciousness emerging in the 50s. And I believe it. I mean, I look at this, what happens with us is that when we went to Australia, you meet Stuart Brand, or we meet Mark Linus in Britain, and you meet each other, and it's like, a brother, or a sister, and it feels like that. And so I think when I said that, it was this experience of when you change your mind on something like this, which is such a big issue, and it's such a big deal to do it, and it opens you up to attack, and you find other people like you, it's magnetic, and I think it's very special. So I think this is an amazing movie, and I do believe actually this is the beginning of a big change, and a big change in the environmental movement.
Professor Ahn, there's one that I think should be directed to you with your IAEA connections. How can safe nuclear technology be introduced faster in, say, China, where they are currently building one coal-fired power plant a week? Someone said, I think it's an astonishing growth.
I'm not so familiar with about China, so my comment is pretty much general. The risk of introducing coal-fired plant is, as the picture showed, is quite greater than the risk of introducing nuclear reactors in terms of the atmospheric contamination. But there is another issue of the management of technologies, and it's deeply involved with different aspects of system safety. Some is rooted in cultural factors, some rooted in the organizational, institutional factors. In general, expanding technologies like nuclear technology in such centralized countries, including Japan and France, would be relatively straightforward, but maintaining technologies and using technologies in a safe manner would be quite different story. So in idealistic situation, we can consider some kind of international collaboration of keeping the same level of safety across the countries, including those developing and newcomer countries. But there is a more complicated issue of countries' sovereignty. And so we always have a sensitive and delicate discussions between those two factors. I think it's again very general comment. As far as I can see from outside, I think Chinese technologies are developing quite fast, and so we can have some good level of confidence in that, as we had developed technologies and systems for safety in other countries like Japan and Korea, and also in the United States. I think the questions will be more about maintenance of the technologies in the future. And as far as the industry is growing, I think the morale is healthy, and people are looking ahead and positive thinking. I think in that phase, I don't think the issue is not that big. But once the things are leveled off and reached in a kind of equilibrium state, I think we really have to carefully observe how things are operated in those countries.
Thank you. Professor Peterson, there are several questions here all around the cost and the environmental impact of extracting uranium and comparing the cost of nuclear power versus gas. It seems today we're pretty much interested in money. Isn't nuclear power just so vastly more expensive?
That is an excellent question, and we do face questions about what is going to happen with natural gas prices. They're low right now in the United States. The cost of natural gas is about 1/6 the cost of oil in the United States on a per BTU basis, which comes from the difficulty of introducing natural gas into transportation and in shipping it to other countries. This, in turn, this differential is unlikely to be sustainable because you can make money by arbitraging this difference. And so I think that we can expect that natural gas prices are going to increase. But the other question is going to be whether it will be possible to also reduce the costs of construction of new nuclear infrastructure while maintaining high levels of safety. And we know that in other areas of technology, we've made very large improvements in our ability to automate, to perform factory-based manufacturing, to modularize. And we've only scratched the surface of those technologies from the perspective of constructing new nuclear infrastructure. So to the point that Junhong has made about the need to also sustain high levels of competence and capability, this really does require a high level of transparency within the organizations that run and regulate nuclear power plants. One of the interesting things that happened in the United States through the 1990s was a change in culture around operations. In fact, you can go into plants and in the training rooms you'll find posters that will say, what's your questioning attitude? Do you have enough questioning attitude? And it'll have a meter which will show red and green. Are you checking and questioning your assumptions? And it's this willingness to question whether what you're doing is right that has actually allowed operational effectiveness and capacity factors to increase a lot in the United States. But cultural issues can make it more difficult. And if you look at a lot of what happened with the accident in Fukushima, much of it was caused by a misdirection of attention by the regulators and by the utilities doing things that didn't contribute ultimately to reducing risk. So I think that the most important thing we can be doing is to try to learn and improve from what we have seen before. And if we can do that in a systematic way and institutionalize that questioning attitude, we have the potential to both bring down the cost of nuclear energy and also to further increase the safety, reduce the environmental impacts. But it's a complex technology, and therefore it does require a questioning attitude, healthy skepticism, but not stupidity, right?
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
I mean, I thought Robert did such a good job in this movie of explaining how we got stuck in this older technological paradigm, for lack of a better word, the light water reactors. I mean, one of the first things that you figure out when you look into this is you're like, you mean we can have fuels that don't melt down? I mean, there's this moment in the movie where Robert's like, you mean it won't melt down? And Charles Till goes, it can't melt down. And you kind of go, really? Because that's everything that you think about with nuclear, is that it just melts down. So with the idea that when you have these pebble bed reactors, you have these liquid metal reactors where when they get hotter, the reaction slows down and stops. That's about as far as I'll go in my physics. That's a big deal. And so the thing, and you kind of go, well, then what are the big drivers of costs? And they do these big analyses of costs. And the big, it varies between plants. But the first thing is that the plants we've had got constructed uniquely for each site rather than being a single design that was standardized across the country. They had all these redundant backup safety systems, so after 3 Mile Island, and then all 3 of the big accidents are loss of coolant accidents. So when you say you can have these meltdown-proof reactors, they can still have accidents, but you're not going to get these loss of coolant accidents that have been the problem for both in reality and in public perception on nuclear. The final thing I would just say is that I didn't realize it even when we were shooting this, but the reactor that I visited as a boy is called the Fort St. Vrain reactor, which is actually a Generation 4 reactor. It was a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, used helium gas to cool it. It was a very advanced reactor. And I remember being told that and just being like, oh, that's bullshit, I was like 15, so of course that was my attitude. But that is now, China now, I believe it's the Tsinghua demonstration, is building this. It's going to come online in a couple of years. Mm-hmm. It is a pebble bed. It is not a light water reactor. I just was looking around online about it. There apparently have been teams of American scientists that have been going over and helping on this. So one of the amazing things that I think you kind of get to the edge of when this movie is not quite in it, and Breakthrough is going to have our own white paper about the economics coming out, but is that it may be that these technologies really do get pioneered in Asia and then come back to the United States. I mean, we as, for a long time we've been like, well, just America, we'll do it all, and then we'll send our technologies around the world, and then we kind of go, wow, but they've actually got that that plant going up in a couple of years. So the part of the hope at the bottom of Pandora's box is the rise of the rest. That's actually something to be excited about and happy about. And I think that's in some ways what all of this is about. It's about getting comfortable with the fact that everyone's going to consume a lot of energy. It's going to be a high energy planet, that wonderful innovations are going to happen in Asia, and that we should be so lucky as to be able to bring those technological innovations back to the United States.
Michael, if I keep you for just a second, several comments. How can we depoliticize this? And how can we sort of separate the corporate America interests with our interests? Because nuclear power seems like big business.
Well, that's not true. So I'll in a minute. I mean, I think the first thing is this does depolarize it. I mean, it's like Richard Rhodes says. It's like the parties just ended up taking opposite positions on this. On France, nuclear energy is a communist and socialist technology. In the United States, nuclear is an anti-communist, anti-socialist technology, even though it requires massive government oversight, serious government investment. So I think as soon as you have Democrats and liberals being like, we need nuclear because it's a good environmental technology, where everybody goes, what? That changes things instantly. So I think in some ways this is key to it. You got to remember, part of the apocalyptic discourse on climate goes, it's going to be the end of the world unless we all cut the amount of energy we consume in half and rely on much more expensive intermittent sources of energy. And Republicans go, no thanks. And when you go, and so they go, therefore, I don't want to do that, therefore I'm skeptical that climate change is as big of a problem as you say. And when you go, look, a lot of nuclear energy is zero carbon, it's actually a critical environmental technology, I think it has a huge impact. And I think it makes Republicans kind of be like, wow, I'm actually pro-environmental, and I think it starts to change. I think it starts to depolarize. On the last part, I mean, this is the funniest thing, is like, that was my attitude. I was like, nuclear is this corporate, thing, it's this corporate energy. It's like nuclear comes out of a government weapons program, and it only became successful with government support. It's happening in China as a public project. The French and the Swedes, who have done it the most, are the most socialist countries. It's a technology that by its nature requires strong public oversight and should always have that. And so you kind of go, of course, in a capitalist society as well, there's going to be ways you want some private sector innovation, entrepreneurialism, but it is strange to spend the last 10 years hearing about how John Doerr and the VCs and Vinod Khosla, we're all going to get rich with renewable energy. And then they go, yeah, nuclear is a big corporate conspiracy, literally like moments later. I mean, it's the same thing where it's like, oh no, renewables are super cheap and everybody can have solar panels and wind farms, whatever. And even if it's a little bit more expensive, it's worth it because of global warming. And then you go, yeah, but nuclear is just going to be too expensive. I mean, so that's the polarization that comes in even in these basic conversations of what the economics are.
I just want to add one thing. One of the most surprising things to me in making this movie was, we always heard about the nuclear industry and their nuclear industry propaganda, and they're selling this a bill of goods. And, there is no nuclear industry. It actually does not exist. There's an energy industry, and these companies, they own nuclear plants, they own coal plants, they own gas plants, they own wind farms, they own solar arrays. They're into anything. They're producing energy, and they like a diverse portfolio, but there's really nobody standing up for nuclear, because the best argument for nuclear is that it's a zero carbon technology, and the same companies that own the nuclear plants own coal plants. So they're not going to make the argument that we should have more nuclear because of all the terrible coal plants, because they own the same coal plants, I was able to get into all kinds of extraordinary places in making this film, including inside the reactor at Chernobyl. But the one place I could never film, and I tried for 2 years, I could never film inside a coal plant, not anywhere in the world. And I tried Poland, Ukraine, Brazil, I tried all these places, because they know that there's nobody's going to go into a coal plant and say anything good about it. So that's all I have to say.
Professor Ahn, is there some sort of asymmetry in our approach, either through our social or our ethics, that you see at play here that needs to be rectified? For instance, one of the questions here was that the United States, the only power in the world to use a nuclear weapon against others. Is there some fundamental, I only see it as asymmetry in the way we approach this?
Well, there is certainly a clear asymmetry in this nuclear application world. One very clear thing is that there are haves and have-nots in the world. Basically, all the technologies related to nuclear power were invented in the United States and utilized by other countries. So all other countries need to get an agreement from the United States. So watching the movie, I was thinking that the IFR technology is so good, I admit it. Do we allow this technology in, say, North Korea? Or in South Korea? Or in Japan? Maybe Japan is in a different situation because it is a non-weapons country, but has a full capability of reprocessing and enrichment. So Japan would be in a different situation. But what if we allow this in Iran? This is a very complicated issue, and we have to solve this issue to eliminate this asymmetry to some extent. If we need to reduce the asymmetry. Another thing is that we have a clear distinction between the current generation and the future generations. Future generations are affected profoundly by what we do now. And so, in a sense, they have, they are within the influence of our generation. And so, we do not have there is an asymmetry as well. Another thing is that those who get risks and those who get benefits are not the same usually. For example, Fukushima people get all those damages, but the benefits were mostly enjoyed by people in Tokyo because the electricity generated there was sent to Tokyo mostly. So in a sense, it is very unfair. That kind of asymmetry is always complicates the problems and the situations when we consider this.
Mr. Pearson, I'd like to ask you a two-word question. Why now?
That's an excellent question. In nuclear technologies, we're looking at timescales of decades and even centuries. And so this is one of the biggest problems we face in addressing these problems, is it's so easy to say, why not tomorrow instead of today? It's the same problem with climate change. In fact, it's a systematic problem. You can't say today it's urgent because we're talking about things which take decades to fix and where the consequences emerge decades in the future. So in some sense, the answer is because if you don't get started today, you'll never get started, right? And I think this is what motivates a lot of people to take on problems that are challenging. And that's why we have engineers and other people that work on these topics where you can spend an entire career and feel like you've taken 2 or 3 steps as opposed to other things where the technologies can advance much more rapidly. But the answer, I think, why now is because we have to get started now, or we will face even more severe consequences in the long term.
Robert, I'd like to address this one to you. We have several on the same topic. How can you help change public opinion in the halls of Congress? Who writes the checks? Who oversees this industry and the creation of these power plants. How do you reach these people?
Well, we live in a democracy still. I know it's not a properly functioning democracy sometimes, and it's messy, but politicians just want to be reelected, and they will respond to public opinion. I think there's a great, I hate to use the word grand bargain, but I'll use it because I have no other word for it. I think there's an opportunity for a bargain here. You've got Republicans who have been supportive of nuclear power for their own reasons for decades, who, from everything I've been told from people who interact with them on a regular basis, I'm talking about people on Capitol Hill, will come to the table on nuclear power if Democrats come to the table with nuclear power. Democrats have been, this is a pretty recent thing that Democrats and Republicans have split on this. Nuclear power was for decades supported by both Democrats and Republicans, a majority Republicans, a minority Democrats, but there was support. You've got this political split now, you've got a political split over climate change, you've got a political split over nuclear energy, which is, in my view, the best solution we have to solve climate change. So if Democrats can get their heads around nuclear power and say, well, this is a solution that needs to be on the table, among other things, to solve the climate crisis, I think they're going to find partners, and Republicans who may not even be convinced that climate change is a particularly pressing issue, but they like the idea of nuclear power for their own reasons. So I feel hopeful that maybe something can be done, but it's not going to be done until people like yourselves start talking to other friends and start speaking out, and people like Michael, who has the courage to go against his friends and colleagues and stand up and say what he believes. Until that conversation starts to happen, it's not going to happen in the halls of Congress. So if this film can nudge that conversation and make it happen, then I'll feel like I've done my job.
I'd like each of you, start with Professor Ahn, look into the future, your crystal ball. Can we, as a society, embrace nuclear power, as the French did? Is that even in our DNA?
Well, I think I do believe that the nuclear power is a very important part of our future, and without that, we cannot have a prosperous society. But there is one condition that we need to have a good strategy or plan for exiting the nuclear utilization. That sounds paradoxical, but without a plan for getting out of the nuclear utilization, when something went wrong, like Fukushima, the country would be in a very risky situation. And it sounds, again, paradoxical, but having an exit strategy for nuclear power strengthens our confidence in utilizing nuclear power. So in that regard, I think we have accumulated too much plutonium, for example. We have to do something about it. We have too much spent fuel, although it is contained within a football stadium. If you consider the latent risk of proliferation of associated with those materials, we cannot turn public perception around about the nuclear power utilization. So my recommendation is to concentrate on developing the back end of the fuel cycle development and having a good solution for phasing out nuclear power when something went wrong. And that includes a reduction of the plutonium accumulation, the nuclear materials accumulation. I think this IFR would be a very important part of the view. I think the HDGR would be a very important part of the view. But we don't have an integrated plan for realizing that really the last phase of the nuclear power utilization, it may come in 400 years from now, from 300 years from now, or maybe tomorrow, but we really need to prepare for it. And I don't think we can utilize nuclear power with confidence without that kind of solution.
Please.
I'll continue on that point. This is actually, I think that Junhong is correct. It's an important exercise to run through. One of the conclusions that you reach, particularly when you mentioned the time scales involved for managing these materials, is that it probably is not practical for us to exit nuclear power. And in fact, one of the most critical things that we need to do is to maintain competence in utilizing this technology and managing the risks associated with it, because we will be working with it over the very long term. And not just the energy side, albeit that's important, but also managing proliferation risks and nuclear security risks is something that humans almost certainly will need to do in perpetuity or suffer for naught. And if you think about what are some of the most important ingredients today for a stable non-proliferation regime, they involve maintaining a high level of transparency. And in fact, if you think about it, what is the most successful international agreement in terms of getting countries to sign on to highly intrusive inspections for things that are going on in very sensitive technologies within their countries? And it turns out to be the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And nations, all but a tiny handful, have signed up to an obligation to allow United Nations inspectors, representatives of the International Atomic Energy Agency, to come and visit every single facility in their country. Now, some countries are not abiding by these requirements in terms of actually being transparent, doing things such as assigning the additional protocol. But to the extent that access to commercial nuclear energy might encourage countries to take more seriously these commitments and the need to be transparent, we can do far more to control proliferation, because we have 36 countries, as was mentioned in the film, that have the technical capability to field nuclear weapons in a relatively short period of time if the political decision is made. And if you're not monitoring, how can neighboring countries have any confidence that it's not happening? And if they don't have that confidence, how can they avoid starting their own secret programs to do the same thing? So in some sense, what we really want to do is encourage a future culture of openness and transparency, both on safety and on security of materials and on abiding by non-proliferation commitments. And to the extent that access to commercial nuclear energy technology might incentivize that kind of behavior, then that would be a positive thing. But in some sense, this is a technology, in fact, we should study how to exit it. When we realize that that's not humanly possible, then we'd better be damn competent about how we manage it going forward.
I just want to clarify one thing. North Korea doesn't need the IFR to make the bomb, right? So just to be clear, if you have the bomb, giving you nuclear energy doesn't change the dynamic at all. Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, and we know that because they keep playing cat and mouse with inspectors, to Per's point. So, for me, that was an important thing to realize. There's 33 or 36 countries in the world that could build a bomb, and 9 of them have chosen to. So most countries that have the capability decide not to get a bomb. And the direction that all this has gone is swords to plowshares. I think part of the psychological piece of this is that people want to put the genie back in the bottle. It's like nuclear weapons are terrible. We don't like the idea of them being pointed at each other, at us, and we want them to go away. And I think that and that's an understandable, I think, desire. I think what you get clear about is that when you go, that's not going to happen, therefore don't let your concerns about nuclear weapons get in the way of nuclear energy. And that's, I think, what Richard Rhodes's piece in this movie was about. And I agree with you. I mean, it's one of the most inspiring parts of nuclear history is this incredible level of cooperation. The other thing I would just say is, 80% of carbon emissions come from about 20 countries. So if you really, I don't think we're talking about giving, every little country in the world nuclear energy, next week. It's really moving the big economies in that way. The other thing I would just say is that to the why now question, I mean, this is a moment when, frankly, the environmental movement is just lost about what to do about global warming. I mean, we have no UN treaty. Cap and trade is not coming back. They're not going to do a carbon price. We're transitioning to gas, which is getting us reduced emissions. But in terms of a plan, the environmental movement has no plan. And I think people are starting to realize that, and they're asking themselves, what is Plan B? Given that Plan A of making fossil energy more expensive didn't work. So I would also just add that I guess I'm just curious, if you'd raise your hands, did this movie change anybody's minds? Did anybody walk in here being anti-nuclear and is now pro-nuclear? Nice. I would just say it'd be great if those of you that it did change your mind, or that it's in the if your mind was being changed before this, I think it is important to write about it. I think it is important to come out about it on your Facebook page. There's going to be a big premiere in Washington, D.C. in June in terms of reaching Capitol Hill. Big premiere in San Francisco, and I think it'd be great if everybody brought their friends to it.
Robert, last word is yours.
Oh gosh, we're done? I was just going to say something about the proliferation thing. I think the other point to make about Iran is Iran has a nuclear reactor and a functioning nuclear reactor. And as we all know, how are they getting fuel to make a nuclear weapon? It's not from the nuclear reactor. They're spinning centrifuges for refining raw uranium up to the 90% level that you need to make a weapon. That's an important distinction. I think people conflate, part of the conflation between nuclear weapons and nuclear power is mistaken, and that the fuel that goes into a nuclear reactor is about 3% refined. I'm ballpark correct here? And a weapon is 90% refined. So it's a very different substance. And one other thing that's been occurring to me lately about this whole issue about nuclear weapons and North Korea and this fear, there's a human tendency to always fight the last war. And so nuclear weapons is still in our mind as the greatest threat that we face. And I don't think that's true anymore. And I think if you read the New York Times about the new thinking in the Defense Department, they agree with this too. Our biggest national security threat right now is cyber attacks. And that is the war of the future. It's untraceable, it's cheap, it's devastating. And nuclear weapons are very expensive, they're very complicated, and they're easily traceable. And if you shoot one off, you are toast, you are dead. Not the case with cyber attacks. So there's a tendency just to focus on this one thing because we've lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons for 60, 70 years now. But I think it's a mistaken idea to think that this is so horrifying that if we get rid of all nuclear power or somehow get rid of nuclear weapons, mankind, for the rest of eternity, as long as we're here, we're going to have the threat of somebody getting a nuclear weapon is going to be there to one degree or another, and we as a global community have to deal with that. And whether we have nuclear power or we don't have nuclear power, that knowledge and that capability is always going to be there. So we need to sort of separate these two things out. But as a final word, I just have to say again, the ideas that we're talking about here, the urgency of this message getting out, the urgency of this becoming a part of the conversation that is happening around climate change, what we do, this is up to you to have that conversation with your friends, to go on your Facebook page. I can't repeat this enough. Get people to see this movie and talk about it, because that's what's going to change things. That's what you can do to change things. And the more people talk about it, the more it will become a movement, and we can actually move forward and actually solve this problem. That's what's so exciting. So Michael's excited, I'm excited. You guys have devoted your life to this. It's exciting when you realize that we can solve this problem for real. So thank you very much for coming to see the film. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Jasmina, for putting this all together.
I'd like to thank all of the panelists. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And also for those of you whose excellent questions I did not get to, I apologize. Please go home and think about this. Thank you. Good night.